Mr. Minister, welcome. We understand you were unable to predict the vagaries of the Washington traffic this morning.
Welcome.
But let me formally get started. Good morning, all. My name is Anupam Srivastava. I'm a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center. And we are very pleased to undertake this activity in partnership with our friends from KOSTI in South Korea, a friendship that goes back 15 to 20 years. I have good friends from KOSTI going back all those years in the room right now, and many others. But I want to be very crisp and brief and allow maximum time of your interaction with our esteemed panel. Just a couple of framing remarks to say that in this relationship of treaty allies, which went through its growing pains and has now stabilized into a very mature relationship, we'll be discussing two aspects. One is the security dimension, where I would say that we have one confounding variable that we deal with, an actor called DPRK, which I would like to submit is neither democratic nor a people's republic. And so it throws up some challenges. But the other and the more noteworthy and wholesome aspect is the economic dimension, especially the industrialized advanced cooperation. And two or three themes that we are dealing on that, we are watching it pivot into a even more niche high-tech area, dealing now slowly with advanced technology products, ATPs and things that Mr. Borman and others can explain much better than I would. And going into joint collaboration types of things. So we are looking at semiconductors, high capacity batteries, other types of things. And so it'll bring up other export control issues of movement of tangibles and intangibles. So we are looking at three aspects. One is a coordination and export control and sanction implementation. So we are looking at tangibles. We are looking also at the monitoring and screening of foreign investments and intellectual property theft types of things as part of our discussion, inbound and outbound, and joint coordination, as I said, on certain niche production types of things. So I think that will frame the discussion all of today, and as I said, tomorrow morning, and that we hope will provide us the guardrails within which to start more promising research in the future. You have the bios of our speakers as well in the conference proceedings. So what I will now do is request my boss, whose visionary leadership has made Stimson grow, and not a person who needs introduction in this town or certainly not in this building, Mr. Brian Finlay, the president and CEO of the Stimson Center. And then I'll do the other speakers as they.
Could you grab a seat right there? And so you
Yes,
can make
yes.
yourself comfortable. Thank you. Anupam. Thank you, sir, for the kind words, Anupam, and welcome everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you to actually welcome people in person back in this room. It seems like it's been a very long time for us, and I suspect for many of you as well. So thank you so much for actually being here and joining us, and those on online as well. I could be very brief this morning. Anupam, I think, has framed this discussion over the next couple of days extremely well, as expected. I do want to, though, offer a warm and our deepest gratitude to KOSTI and to our colleagues who have helped pull this gathering together. Dr. Lee, it's such a pleasure to welcome you back to Washington in particular, and I thank you for helping facilitate this. My hope is that we can use the next couple of days to really find collaborative opportunities. I hope to expand our relationship between KOSTI and Stimson, and indeed across the wider community here in Washington that are dedicated to the issues that we are going to focus on. It's an important part, I think, of our mission, and I know certainly of your mission as well, and we're really deeply grateful for your intellectual partnership. As you may know, for the past 40 years, the Stimson Center really has been dedicated to working at that nexus between security and prosperity, security and economics. And we have, I think, just not a passion for admiring the problem, but really rolling up our sleeves and operationalizing the work that we do. And so, yes, we do research, we write reports, but rather than standing outside of the tent and throwing rocks at those arrayed here on the stage, really, it is our belief that it's our unique role to work collaboratively with constituencies across this town and really around the world in unique ways, developing solutions and working to build that toolkit to implement them. And it's for that reason that we have developed these unique partnerships with government, with private industry in this country and around the world. Just by way of example, over the course of the pandemic, our 38 North team, many of you are, of course, familiar with, worked hand in glove with the UN, with the ROK government on a series of research initiatives that helped to build and identify good practices from the Korean experience on border management that could be taken and shared with governments around the world. As you are aware, the ROK is one of the few countries that flattened the COVID curve, particularly in the early days, without imposing nationwide lockdowns or border closures. And the point is, I think, whether you sit in Seoul or whether you are in Washington or at other capitals, we have much to learn, I think, from one another. And that really is the point, I think, of this conversation that we are going to initiate over the next couple of days. Our objective today and tomorrow really is to build upon that successful bilateral cooperation between our two countries. And I think it's our belief, certainly, that its unique geographic and certainly economic circumstances mean that Korea has a unique role, I think, to play in our collective efforts to manage advanced technologies in particular. We know that the ROK has been a treaty ally of the United States since the 1950s, and our cooperation, of course, has been an anchor for peace in the region, in East Asia, and certainly beyond. We're also aware that economic cooperation, particularly in the value-added sectors, has been a hallmark of bilateral cooperation between the ROK and the United States. And it is, of course, in this context that President Biden's recent announcement to set up the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, I think, carries an immense set of opportunities and scope for growth in the deepening of ties between our two countries. And so with this gathering, as Anupam mentioned, it's our hope that we can explore these issues a little bit more in depth, identify some synergies in the ROK-US strategic relationship and build upon that engagement. I'm very grateful to you, Anupam, for pulling this event together. Thank you so much for your diligence and your good efforts to bring this really, I think, unique and disparate community together. I thank as well our participants, our speakers. As I look down this panel, I'm struck by something that is very un-Stimson due to a series of last-minute cancellations, changes, and schedules. We ended up with what we call in Washington a mantle, and this is very un-Stimson, I want to say, not to take anything away from we do believe that men can do these jobs as well as women, and it's up to you, gentlemen, to prove that fact today. As you know, Stimson really does believe in diversity on panels. It's part of the richness and it's part of our competitive advantage, I think, in the space here at Stimson, taking nothing away from the very talented individuals that sit here on the panel, but I did want to acknowledge that. Once again, thank you, Dr. Lee, to your colleagues at Kosti, and Anupam, I give the floor to you, sir. You can just speak right from there. I think you're mic'd, are you? No, you're not. Oh.
I have to step clear of the wires. We don't want our wires lost. Thank you. And I did want to acknowledge that late last evening, we received a note from Ms. Thea Kendler's office in the Department of Commerce, expressing support and encouragement for this program. She was scheduled to be a speaker. I suppose Mr. Borman, when he speaks in a few minutes, will say more about that. But this is to pick up on Brian's point. We have 3 senior lady speakers, women speakers, on the program till about 3 days ago, and then through various sets of things had to drop out. So the challenge is upon the men too, as Brian said. I now request Dr. Yun-Ho Lee, the president of Kosti, to come and address this as a co-host for us. This is a collaborative program between the Korean Security and Trade Agency. I will only mention this, as I said, I'll not read the bios for you, but it's been a very dynamic leadership of Dr. Lee in about since May of 2020, when he took over the Kosti leadership and has set into motion a series of very, very inspirational leadership things and initiatives, including this one. and other engagements that he has to build technical capacity within COSTI, and therefore inform the policy recommendations that come out of that work. I might also mention that he has a PhD in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech, where I once used to teach in a different lifetime and guest lectures in special programs. Dr. Lee also serves on the office of the President's office in Seoul as part of a trade industry portfolio. So he comes with very rich, impeccable credentials. And we are delighted to have you come and co-host this event, Dr. Lee. Please. And actually, you can speak from there as well. You all are mic'd up, or you might prefer to speak from here, in which case we have microphones.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Anupam. Even though I don't think I deserve that kind of introduction, as I am introduced, I'm the president of COSTI, which is the Korean Security Agency for Trade and Industry. As you can see, the United States and Korea has differences. I'm very short, and President Finlay, who was here minutes ago, is very tall. It would be quite difficult for the cameraman to adjust his camera angle to fit myself into his lens. So even though there are differences between the two countries, I think we have many commonalities, especially in the area of trade, security, and the importance of economic security as well. So that is why I suggested to hold this kind of event to Mr. Brian Finlay when I first met him in May in this place, actually the other place, the meeting room over there, to co-host forum in which we could invite the researchers and experts from both countries who are interested in economic security. That is why we are here. After all those efforts by both organizations, we are now here to exchange ideas of both countries' experts and leading policy influencers to deepen our understanding and to share our understanding on the common goals in economic security. And let me go back to the original text that I was given by my staff members. Mr. Young Jae Kim, Economic Minister of the Korean Embassy, and Mr. Matthew Borman from the Commerce Department, Mr. Raymond Holtz from the State Department, and Mr. Brian Finlay, of course, the President of the Stimson Center, and both countries' businessmen, trade experts, and ladies and gentlemen. It is my sincere pleasure to be in Washington, D.C. To co-host the Korea-US Joint Conference on Economic Security with the Stimson Center. We think there is a growing interest in economic security globally, and international community has been mobilizing various means, including export control and sanctions, while reviewing effective policies in various aspects, including supply chain disruption and technology protection. Korea and USA and the United States have made strong commitment in this regard. Following the summit meeting between the Republic of Korea and the United States last year, the summit meeting this year also shed light on the importance of export control and investment screening, and the need for greater cooperation between the authorities of the two countries. In this regard, I believe that exchanges and cooperation in export control and investment screening in both public and private sectors are of great importance for the security and development of both countries. Against this backdrop, COSTI and the Stimson Center agreed to host the first Korea-US joint conference on economic security, considering that it is in the interest of both countries to open a forum for the related experts from both countries to exchange opinions on common interests. At this conference, such issues as trade policy and export control, cooperation on supply chain, technology protection and standards are to be discussed between the experts from both countries. I'm certain that it will serve as a foundation for Korea and the United States to work together and respond to changes in international order and environment. So, concluding my remark, I'd like to convey my sincere gratitude to my colleague in the Stimson Center, especially Brian Finlay, the president, and Dr. Anupam of the Stimson Center for the wonderful preparation and the wonderful place in this city, Washington, D.C. And I also convey my sincere gratitude to the brilliant guests from both countries' government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. You may see his mannerisms are soft, but he is a driving force, providing leadership to us throughout these months. And I think the real work starts after we identify next steps from here. Thank you very much. I'd like a brief word of welcome also from our distinguished colleague from the Department of Energy. Mr. Richard Talley is from the National Nuclear Security Administration, and he's also been a big supporter of this program. I would like just a quick word of welcome from Richard. His own leadership is also much like the Department of State, traveling heavily this week in different parts of the world, and Richard will give us time, stay through, and also offer a vote of thanks at the end of the day. But just a quick word, if I may, Richard, and then we get to our speakers of the day.
When I showed up this morning, Anupam told me that I'd be giving some opening remarks, and I go, really? It would have been nice to have known that in advance. As you can see, I'm a fairly casual person, and I'm glad to hear that after this opening session, we're going to go to Chatham House rules, where we're going to have open discussion. And I encourage everyone here to ask a lot of questions and to have a very, very healthy discussion, because we have some great people here, and I want to be able to utilize those resources. I am, as Anupam said, there are a lot of people in my office who are gone. I'm actually the acting director today of my program, which probably is going to shock some people to hear that. But I met with Dr. Lee in May with Corey Hinderstein, who is from NNSA. And one of the things he mentioned was supply chains in South Korea. And he mentioned what percentage of commodities used by South Korea come from China. And he also mentioned what percentage of the commodities that Samsung sells are actually made in Vietnam. So despite the fact that we are US and South Korea here, we do also need to think about other countries in the region. Our economies are not completely tied together exclusively. There are other countries as well, and we need to keep those in mind. I think about that because in my portfolio at NNSA, I also work with Taiwan, who I'm going to call a frenemy of South Korea, and I also work with Vietnam. And I do know that both South Korea and Vietnam are concerned about export controls in general, and I hope to do something to work on that problem. And so I'm here to listen, and I'm known in the office as the idea generation fairy, and I hoped that this will result in more projects in the future. And so thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. And let's now turn to our speakers of the day, the substantive speakers. And it's my pleasure to invite and welcome Mr. Raymond Hortz, the Deputy Director of the Conventional Arms Threat Reduction Office, part of the ISN Bureau, the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation. And as he can explain to you, the wide portfolio that his office oversees. We are absolutely delighted to have you here, and you are mic'd up. You have the power. You can speak from there, or you can choose to speak from this section. Right.
So good morning. Like Richard, I'm also an acting director this week because the common theme is that we have lots and lots of people traveling. So that's one of the things that as we come back and we're seeing people face to face and meeting in person. The other thing that's happening is people are traveling again more. So that pace is certainly ramped up. So I'm the acting director of ISN CATR, the Office of Conventional Arms Threat Reduction. My director, my boss, is in Vienna this week at the General Working Group of the Wassenaar Arrangement, the multilateral export control regime for conventional dual-use goods. And so I'm here in her place, and I'm really happy to be here at Stimson. I'm really happy to be at an event with our ROK allies, because my own history with working with the Republic of Korea goes back more than 20 years. It's always been one of the most vibrant and exciting parts of my career, and I'm very pleased to be involved with this event today. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you a little bit about how the United States implements tools such as export controls to address our foreign policy goals. The world we live in is one of rapidly expanding technology that's transforming how we live, work, and how we interact. We are also in an era of increasing multipolarity, where certain states harbor revisionist aims. To mitigate the risk that advanced technology can be misused, the United States and many other countries, including the Republic of Korea, have adopted export control rules and procedures that focus on non-proliferation. The rules and procedures help ensure that the exports of sensitive technologies will not contribute to the spread of weapons of mass destruction and destabilizing military capabilities. Countries that adopt similar export controls can have confidence that their goods will not be misused or diverted to inappropriate end uses. Equally, export controls provide the companies manufacturing or exporting these goods the confidence that their products will not become notorious. This confidence, in turn, facilitates peaceful cooperation between firms and individuals and institutions across borders that might otherwise be inhibited by concerns about diversion, misuse, or proliferation. Perhaps most importantly, export controls provide confidence for governments by facilitating bona fide sales by companies of sensitive goods while preventing transactions of concern, such as those cases of high technology trade, where there's a clear proliferation risk. Okay. I'm going to review how the United States uses its export controls to achieve its policy goals, particularly for international and national security purposes. This system that we have requires input from departments and agencies across the United States government. But the export controls that I would like to discuss are primarily implemented by the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Energy, which is also here, and the Department of Defense, which is not here. But the primary agency are the Departments of Commerce, who is represented by Deputy Assistant Secretary Borman. We're having this discussion at the right time because we continue to see unprecedented global activity in export controls, particularly in response to Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine. But other concerns with direct impacts on international trade and security policy are implicated as well. As the focus on recent export control actions has largely centered around Russia, the United States has not taken its eye off other long-term challenges, including strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. Indeed, the PRC's desire to obtain sensitive technology for military use poses threats that are deep and daunting. The PRC continues to press ahead with its Military Civil Fusion Strategy, MCF. Through MCF, Beijing is systematically reorganizing its science and technology enterprise to ensure new innovations advance both economic and military development. The elimination of barriers between Beijing's security and civilian sectors continues to complicate our export control efforts. And the PRC has demonstrated the lengths it is willing to go to acquire and exploit the world's most cutting-edge technologies, including through theft, to achieve military dominance and find novel tools for repression. One way the United States government is rising to the challenge of MCF is through the use of export controls on key technologies that might be diverted to military use. Export controls are effective not only for ensuring as a general principle that sensitive technology is not diverted for unauthorized use, but to achieve other specific national security and foreign policy aims. In the context of Russia's brutal and unprovoked war against Ukraine, the United States has created a multifaceted approach on export controls to deny Russia access to critical technologies. For nearly a year, the United States government has worked along 37 allies and partners, including the Republic of Korea, to respond to both to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and Belarus's complicity in Russia's war of choice. Included in this response, the United States has imposed export controls to impose severe and immediate economic costs on Russia. Our export controls work to deprive Russia of the resource and technology needed to sustain its unjust war, in addition to ensuring that this unlawful war against Ukraine is a strategic failure. Our controls on U.S. exports to Russia establish a policy of denial for any U.S. company seeking to export nearly any controlled item or technology manufactured in the United States to Russia. This has cut off Russia's military and defense industry from semiconductors and other technical parts that it needs to supply Putin's war. Through the foreign direct product rule, the majority of foreign exports to Russia that are manufactured or designed with U.S. software, technology, or equipment now also require export licenses from the United States. These foreign exports with U.S. technology also fall under a policy of denial, preventing Russia from gaining access to key items from other places. Equally important, we have continued to coordinate with our allies and partners on strengthening their own export controls and policy to prevent Russia from shopping around in search of U.S. items or items made with U.S. components and technology. To date, the United States, along with its 37 allies and partners across the globe, including the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the entirety of the European Union, have implemented substantially similar controls using each country's own respective legal authorities. These are among the most sweeping export controls ever levied against any country. Our actions send a clear signal of just how serious the United States and our partners and allies are about imposing severe costs on Russia and its enablers for their egregious actions in Ukraine. Export controls and sanctions taken in concert with our partners have already inflicted a severe toll on Russia's military and economy, in addition to isolating its government internationally. Rather than breaking the resolve of the Ukrainian people or dividing the international consensus, President Putin has strengthened our shared determination. Another area of serious concern, as I mentioned earlier, is the PRC. The United States has long expressed concern about the PRC's use of dual-use technology to further its military modernization, as well as its use of advanced technologies to abuse human rights. These PRC actions are contrary to the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and our partners. For example, Advanced U.S. semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment are used in items that support the PRC's military advanced systems development programs, artificial intelligence programs, outer space weapons, hypersonic missiles, and nuclear weapons. The United States also remains concerned that PRC entities added to the Department of Commerce's entity list continue to have access to sensitive U.S. technologies and items, evading U.S. export controls. The United States will continue to work with all countries to ensure that our export control policies are consistent and transparent, and will work to align our controls with partners to the greatest extent possible. As I've been doing this kind of work, one of the things I've learned to appreciate deeply is that export controls work best when there's a strong partnership with industry. Today's security challenges impact all of us, not just governments. As we face new and emerging threats, industry is often the first critical line of defense. Industry has an absolutely vital role to play in export controls. Companies must proactively and carefully consider those actors with which they choose to do business. Okay. I understand there's going to be an opportunity for questions at the end, and I'm happy to answer any questions at that time. And with that, I will turn it back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
No. It's absolutely fine. I was thinking, Mr. Hortz, I thank you very much for those very rich insights. I was thinking back to 2004, 5, 6 timeframe when we were running a series of trainings for the Chinese officials, including the PLA officials, on the control list of MTCR and others that were getting translated. It was a difficult challenge also because of the limitations of English and to have to explain the difference between, say, navigation and circular navigation. I mean, this is just an example, but we were also doing some research at that point on the Loral Space Hughes and the rocket launch failure. And one of the meetings one had was with the China Academy of Launch Vehicles. And after that meeting, we went to the cafeteria, and people sharing that cafeteria were people from the other side of the building, which was run by the PLA's rocket forces. And so the military-civil fusion was very much visible even 15 years ago. It's my pleasure to bring and invite Mr. Matthew Borman, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, somebody I'm privileged to have known for close to 15 years now, for his wonderful leadership in the BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security, Department of Commerce, and many, many other task forces and important U.S. policy assignments that he heads up or works as a part of. It's a true pleasure to get to know you, meet you, sir. You can speak from there, or yeah.
Oh, it's right here.
Yes. Thank you.
Morning to everyone, and thank you to Brian, who looks like he's left, but Anupam, Dr. Lee, for inviting us to speak. These kind of events are very important to us. To pick up on something Ray said, our Bureau in particular, but the other agencies as well, need to constantly engage with industry as well as foreign partners. So we really understand the technologies, the markets, the competition in the global space. So we really appreciate that. I'm going to touch on probably 3 themes, but before I do that, for those of you who are not as familiar with the Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Industry and Security, and the Export Administration regulations, 2 really key points. It's the Bureau of Industry and Security is BIS, not BIS, right? And the Export Administration regulations are the EAR, not the EAR. And if you don't remember anything else from my remarks, remember those 2 things, because those are really important. All right, anyway, I'll touch a little bit first on economic security. I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian here in that what we do at BIS is national security and foreign policy. Now, drawing the distinct line between national security and economic security is often challenging, and many people ask questions about that. But at the end of the day, the actions we take in export controls are really either national security based, meaning we are, as Ray said, we are trying to keep the most sensitive technology from the parties that could do us harm. whether it's weapons of mass destruction or advanced conventional arms. And equally important is the foreign policy piece, which is primarily protection of human rights. In other words, we do not want US technology and ideally allied technology to go to parties where it will be used to abuse human rights. Now, in doing that, there certainly could be an element of economic security, but at the end of the day, our statute, and you may hear more about this from Kevin a little bit later, the Export Control Reform Act is fundamentally our authority to impose controls for national security and foreign policy reasons. So that's one thing I want to make sure everybody's clear on. Now, again, you could certainly have some overlap as you're trying to protect supply chains and reduce supply chain vulnerabilities, for example, and using export controls as a tool, but it still is ultimately linked to national security or foreign policy. So with that overview, I want to touch a little bit on a rule some of you may have heard of that we posted about 2 weeks ago that is designed to do exactly what I've just described. And that is impair China's ability to achieve its goal of either parity or superiority in the semiconductor space. And the national security rationale and foreign policy rationale for that is, as you get to more and more advanced levels, the misuses of those are more significant. They have plenty of legitimate civilian commercial uses. In fact, the vast majority, as everybody here knows, of semiconductors are very legitimate civilian commercial uses. But those technologies also can advance conventional arms capability, weapons of mass destruction capability, and cyber surveillance capabilities to abuse human rights. And the public record is replete with China's actions and ambitions in that space. So the rule we took to really restrict their ability to get and have produced advanced chips for AI, their supercomputer and exascale programs, and their semiconductor manufacturing capability, that's what that rule goes to. Now, what has always been clear, but is even more clear now, is for those kind of actions to be effective, we have to have alignment with allied governments who have companies with similar capabilities. And we also have to have close ongoing cooperation with the industries that do that work for two reasons. One is because no matter how much expertise we have in the government, we're not the ones who are designing the chips and manufacturing the chips and packaging the chips and selling them. There are companies who do that, and we need to be constantly talking to them to understand that. And also realize that those companies have a stake. It comes back to something else Ray said, which is at the end of the day, any responsible company does not want its product, whether it's a semiconductor or something else, being used in an advanced Chinese or Russian weapon system, or being used in some surveillance system that's used to abuse human rights in Xinjiang province or in Hong Kong, for example, or to help further militarize the shoals in the South China Sea. So that's the, in addition to BIS and EAR, that's really the main point I would really like everyone to take away from at least my remarks, that at the end of the day, this is to focus on our national security and foreign policy interests, recognizing that we're now having to go further upstream, if you will, to the semiconductors. Obviously, we've long had controls on actual weapons and very restrictive policies and the major subsystems for weapons, but semiconductors are just so central to everything that that we had to take this step to get at that action. A couple other things also to touch on. Russia. We really appreciate the Korean government and Korean industry in stepping up to the plate and restricting their trade with Russia for all the obvious reasons, again, that Ray mentioned. And we think that has had a significant impact already on their defense industrial base and their ability to continue to develop develop and field military capabilities. And again, the cooperation, not just of other allied governments, but of companies and industries in allied countries is critical. And some of you may know, we did a public outreach. We've done a lot of public outreach on the Russia sanctions, but in particular for Korean industry early on, because I know there are a lot of questions about how would those sanctions, either by the US or the Korean government, impact Korean companies' operations outside of Korea. in Vietnam or wherever else there's design and production. And so I would encourage anyone who has continuing questions about that to feel free to reach out and talk to us about that, because we want to make sure Korean industry, as well as other industry, fully understands our controls. Because as you do know, we've significantly extended our extraterritorial reach through, I think, our now famous or infamous foreign direct product rule, which again, as Ray said, touches foreign products, particularly against semiconductors, but other foreign products that are designed abroad if they're based on US software technology or manufactured essentially on a line with a US tool. And that's reaching into a foreign supply chain. Now, the last point I'd make on this is coming back to our October 7th rule. We intended it to be, and we're always interested in feedback, to target Chinese capabilities and acquisition, but not disrupt the global semiconductor supply chain. And there's been a lot of press reporting on this already, but we have and will continue to make sure that we take the appropriate implementation steps so that we don't disrupt the global supply chain. Generally for semiconductors, we do want to disrupt China's supply chain and China's acquisition strategy. The last thing I want to touch on is a topic that had previously been more prominent, but now I think it's been a little bit overshadowed by Russia and China and semiconductors, and that is emerging technology. Way back now in 2018, when the Congress revised the statutory authority for US government review of inbound investments, of foreign investments in the United States, and a sort of a legislative Hail Mary pass, for those of you who follow American football. It was an opportunity to finally reauthorize on a permanent basis our statutory authority. And part of the legislative deal for that was explicit direction to us at Commerce with our other agency partners to identify and appropriately control emerging and foundational technologies. And we've been doing this on a regular basis, ideally through the multilateral forum. But this is an area we are always interested in input from industry, recognizing that when you tell us about your next greatest technology, we will likely evaluate it and perhaps we'll put some controls on it. But again, we're looking to do these controls in a way that keeps that technology that could be sensitive from a national security or foreign policy viewpoint from countries that don't share our values, but not impair the continued development of that technology within the allied group. And so if you look at, for example, the statements from the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, particularly as it relates to export controls, there's an export control working group, that's what we're trying to do. We have a similar arrangement with Japan. We also are just starting a similar arrangement in the supply chain, secure supply chain dialogue with Korea. So we're looking to do this with our closest allies. What are the technologies that matter the most from a national security and foreign policy viewpoint? How do we agree on consistent treatment within the group and outside the group? So I think I'll stop at that point because I know we're probably a little behind schedule, but happy if we have time to take questions down upon.
I think we are more or less on schedule. We got such very good guidance, and I hope that there are a few minutes for questions from Mr. Borman and others. It's my pleasure to also welcome the economic minister from the Embassy of South Korea, Mr. Young Jae Kim. I do not have a bio to read for you, sir, but I know that it's a very challenging portfolio that you're handling, and for all the reasons that we just heard in terms of the scope as well as the challenges of this portfolio. So we very much look for your insights and guidance in how this work is going, and Stimson welcomes you here. Please, we look forward to your opening remarks here and your instructions and guidance.
Thank you, Dr. Srivastava. I will introduce myself in the middle of my speech. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Lee Hun-ho, Stimson Center, and Kosti for inviting me here. It is also my pleasure to see Mr. Matt Borman, our key partner in BIS Commerce, and Mr. Raymond Hotz in the State Department. At the outset, I must say that it's not just Washington traffic that I underestimated, but I underestimated the size of and the publicity of this event. I thought that this is a small gathering of intimate gathering of experts, but at the reception, I was given the microphone and this podium, all of things. I'm not sure if I can say all of what I was going to say, but anyway, today's topic, economic security, is the talk of the town and the talk of the world. But has any one of you heard of the definition? Maybe a few. Dealing with economic security issue is my daily job in the embassy, but I don't know the definition. What I know is that the economic security is such an extensive topic that I would say, and this has a virtually unlimited scope. Let me take an example. The hardest issue between Korea and the United States currently is the electric vehicle tax credit and the Inflation Reduction Act. This is about a discriminatory tax scheme between domestic products and imported products. This is also about the detrimental effect on the exports of other trading partners. All these are regulated by traditional trade agreements. So it is an old type of trade issue. But many of us in Korea believe this issue as an economic security issue. Why is that? No matter what definitions the scholars, experts, or the practitioners have, people tend to think that economic security means those economic issues as essential as national security. So in that regard, it seems to me that economic security is delimited by the degree of importance of a matter, rather than by the nature or the type of the issues. With that introduction, I'd like to present overviews of the bilateral economic security issues between our two countries in two aspects. The first is the general overview of what kind of economic security issues are out there. The second is the overview focused on the export control issues between our two countries, as this is the primary mission of COSTI. So for the general overview, I believe the topics in each session of today will well represent the overview of economic security issues. But from my personal experience of long working on trade negotiation, much of time together with Professor Jung In-kyo here, let me draw an analogy between trade liberalization on the one hand and technology protection on the other hand in their policy methodologies. During the past decades, when many governments pursued trade liberalization, we wanted a free cross-border movement of three things: goods, money, and people in the long run. Trade in goods means what you understand as export and import, desirably without unnecessary trade barriers and protectionism. Money means cross-border investment, capital movement, including repatriation of profit, again, without unnecessary control by the governments. People means both labor forces and consumers, but the movement of people is the area where progress was the least significant in the trade negotiation, largely because it is related to the immigration issues. But the successful cases were US-Chile FTA and US-Singapore FTA, where the US allocated a professional visa quotas for a certain number of Chilean and Singaporean nationals. Korea was unsuccessful in getting the quota from Chorus FTA because the immigration/trade policy of the US government has already changed at the Korea's turn to have an FTA with the United States. Since then, we are making efforts to acquire the quota through the legislation in the US Congress. In addition to these three types of cross-border movement, a new mode of cross-border movement appeared in the form of digital trade. Certain countries already entered into trade agreements on digital trade, and this is the area where many stakeholders eagerly anticipate the tangible outcomes from the current or the future negotiations, including Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that has recently launched. Now I'm going to turn to how these four modes of cross-border movement are applied to the recent economic security issue of technology protection. First, on goods, it is the export control that you need to do. or you can do easily when you need to protect your own technology. Traditionally, export control was used to prevent the cross-border movement of arms, WMD, or nuclear materials, but the utility of this tool was expanded as it can be also used to the purpose of geopolitical or diplomatic or national security objectives, technology protection, and even industrial competition. So when the purpose is arms control, the control destination is mainly the adversaries or the conflicted region in the world. But when the purpose is industrial competition and maintaining the technology supremacy, the tool can also be used when the destination is allies and partners, not to mention adversaries. Let me return to this part at my conclusion. Second, on investment, you want to protect your essential industries from inbound investment, in most cases, from the inbound investment from real or potential adversaries. At the same time, you want to protect your essential industries from moving out to other countries, in particular to adversaries. Korea is one of the few countries that have this outbound investment protection system in place. And there is a very active movement now in Washington, D.C. to introduce this type of protection, both in legislation and in administrative regulations. It's relatively easy to implement the screening system against adversaries. Again, the important question is whether we can use the tools between allies and partners, because we are competitors in the global market, and we are all avid profit seekers in industries and businesses. Third, people. Again, like in the trade negotiation, this is the weakest link as far as I see. Border control is to block movement of criminals and terrorists. But in high-tech industries, it is no secret that a certain country offers a big-sized compensation to the employees of other countries who possess key technologies. As the movement of people made the least progress in the trade negotiation, I think the personnel security is one of the weakest parts of technology protection. In addition, and a separate matter, workforce shortage is the major challenge in many core industries, including semiconductor and nuclear, which is again considered another important topic in economic security. Lastly, digital also can be a main pathway of technology transfer or theft. Cyber protection and digital security are another essential elements of economic security, and I believe that this aspect will be more deeply discussed in one of the sessions today. Now, moving to the specific issue of export control, Korea's export control authorities are divided very similarly to the system of the United States. You know, ITAR and the EAR and the Department of Energy for nuclear. In Korea, the corresponding agencies are Defense Acquisition Program Administration and Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy, assisted by KOSTI and Nuclear Safety and Security Commission. So as a final point, let me exemplify a few issues between our two countries in these areas. On ITAR, many items related to space exploration, such as satellites and the rocket launching technology, are protected. Our two countries are committed to strengthening the Korea-US alliance across all sectors of space cooperation, but export authorization by the US government authorities is sometimes the necessary condition to move forward many cooperation projects between our two countries. On EAR, I believe previous speakers already covered this area. Russia and FDPR, Korea was one of the countries that were exempted from the application of FDR because we took the measure equivalent to the United States. Already mentioned, our two countries also closely consulted in the recent expansion of export control on semiconductor chips and equipment against China. On export control on nuclear, that's recently we seem to find an issue here as well, which I will not go into details about. These are some of the examples of challenging issues, and not any of these is easy to resolve. The bottom line is that there are some tools that are devised to use against enemies and adversaries. We partners and allies must coordinate well to maximize the impact of these tools on the targets, but also to minimize collateral damage on ourselves and other allies and partners. At the same time, we must restrain ourselves from using these tools between ourselves. I believe that our two countries have always overcome difficulties and found a way forward in the spirit of alliance and trust. I'm optimistic that we will continue to do so, and today's seminar will serve as a building block for future achievement in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I think we have time for a few quick questions. If you will raise your hands, we have a couple of handheld mics. Although the room is not too large, you can speak from there as well. It's a democratic setup, so if you will just raise your hand and let me know.
Presentations are so comprehensive.
Absolutely, yes. Hi. Any thoughts? Yes. Mr. Jay Nash.
Hello, good day, everyone. I'm Jay Nash from the Center for Policy Research, University of Albany, State University of New York. Thank you for an invitation to be here. I had a question for Mr. Kim, if I could. Really appreciated your remarks on some of the measures that ROK is undertaking, specifically in the area of investment controls. And I think you made a good point about Korea has in place the outbound investment controls. I didn't quite catch though, in terms of inbound investment controls, is that something that you're currently still exploring, or you already have some measures in place on inbound investment as well? And I apologize if I missed that part.
Yes, we have both ways protection already. Yes, that's a simple answer. Yes,
That works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mr. Brian Fleming and others will be discussing CFIUS and screening types of things in detail after this, but thank you. Yes, and I made reference to that for precisely that point. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lira Kim from the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C. And thank you for the eminent speakers here. I have a question about the export control because recently I have read a very interesting report from CSET, Center for Emerging Technology and Security. Maybe Kevin Wolf, you already know about the report. This report is about the export controls effect to limit the strategic competitors' capabilities on critical technology. So according to this report, the lessons from the satellite cases of the United States in the past, there is a limitation effect of the export control to curb or to limit the expansion of capabilities. And also there are some issues about even the export controls could hinder some advance of U.S. competitiveness and innovation effects. And in addition, nowadays the semiconductor is a really hot issue. And for me, regarding the semiconductor, there is the upstream supply chains. The upstream supply chains is also there are lots of the Chinese materials.
Right.
And so, how do you think about we can really how can the reaction of the China if regarding the export?
So easy question to answer before the coffee break. I think Mr. Borman is here, and his former senior colleague, Mr. Kevin Wolf, is here with us. But yes, as he is subtly signaling, I think Mr. Borman is the person under the gun right now. So, sir, your views. Yeah.
At the end of the day, we can't predict what China might do or might not do. Today, they have taken public statements with the marshes, complaining about the action, but I haven't seen anything more concrete. But you're right. In semiconductor and other tech sectors, there are a lot of Western dependence. A lot of Western dependence. There's from China, And that's something that, you know, has to be addressed, and part of this effort, sort of one of the other sides of this coin is addressing those vulnerabilities. At the end of the day, export controls generally is not a tool to do that, except maybe in specific circumstances. So that's another reason why it's very important for us to continually get input from not only US companies, but foreign tech companies to get early warnings if China is starting to restrict critical components that we might have to figure out how to address.
Yes. In fact, can I add to your pleasure and raise the issue, the delicate issue of rare earths and how China is behaving on that? That's yet another area that will come up for major problems.
Yeah.
Do you wish to? Yeah.
Well, as folks probably know, we also have some other authorities in commerce and BIS that are defense and industrial base related, Section 232 authority, and we just did not long ago a report on neodymium magnets. And if anybody has a chance to read the conclusion of that and the president's decision on that, there are a number of steps that need to be taken to reduce dependency and improve, not in the US, but in allied countries, the ability to obtain the material and produce those magnets. But imposing tariffs was not one of those.
Yes.
So there are those efforts that are underway, and certainly with the CHIPS Act, there's a piece of that goes to supply chain issues.
Absolutely. I might just add that in long years of running training by folks like us in China and for the Chinese interagency here, I'll give you one stunning insight. We were running a training program for Chinese customs and their licensing agency. And the rare earth issue comes up, the controversial Chinese requirement to have technology transferred by a foreign player to the local JV in a 50-50 type. And then and only then can you import. And I said to him that you are already being sued at the ICJ and perhaps even higher. And you cannot sustain this position. And he laughed at me and he said, well, of course we are going to lose. And so I said, so why do this? He says, because we will drag this for a few years until which time we're able to bleed and get technology. And then the case can be settled. It doesn't matter. Which to me said a lot in terms of the determination of the MCF and the march of acquiring the technology and then changing your position in terms of future negotiations. So since we have the advantage of very little traffic between here and the coffee, I was going to use that to get us 5 more minutes of questions, because I think we have a wonderful, rich senior panel here. Any more questions? We have Mr. Fleming. Let's start with that.
Thank you. Matt, this is for you. This may tread on some of what Kevin's going to cover, but at the time and directly after the October 7 rule came out, there was a lot of talk from senior officials in your building about making these controls multilateral, working with allies to try to do that in the way that the Russia controls have been made multilateral. And during the course of this year, I'm just curious what you foresee as the prospects for success there, the challenges. Obviously with China, there's just different dimensions to this and perhaps bigger challenges. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So I think this is something that will not be a surprise to anyone, but all of the technology-based controls that were in our October 7th rule, the AI chips, the tools, we will move those to the Wassenaar arrangement for 2023 for consideration, and we'll see how that plays out. But we also certainly are continuing to talk to the key allies about things that can be done in the interim, because at the end of the day, those controls are not going to be effective, frankly, unless we can get the other supplier governments to impose similar controls. And my sense is we're going to see more and more of this in other sectors, where again, it's incumbent upon us to talk to our allies and say, these are the various technologies that matter the most to us. And can we all agree on a common licensing policy if they're already controlled, and if not, a common control policy and then a licensing policy. To me, this is just the obvious way that we're going to continue to pursue this.
So somewhat similar to the 600 and the 9X515 and others.
A little bit, but again, even those we didn't necessarily seek to get allied controls, although frankly, a lot of them were already controlled. So there was more a matter of licensing policy.
Correct.
Here it's a combination of policy for
And
what,
coordination, yeah.
but then what's not controlled, especially if it's in the emerging space,
Yeah.
getting alignment on some sort of plural element.
I think Mr. Wolf.
Can I
did
follow up
good.
your question?
Yes,
So you talked about alignment on lists of controls, the specific commodity software technologies. But since the end use controls, the US person controls are basically just a derivative or expansion of the catch-all controls that allies have in their systems to regulate activities if in support of WMD related end uses. Why isn't it the case that the allies would also have under their systems, because they have authority for catch-all controls, to also impose in their systems end use controls along the lines of the new US person controls? Why focus only on lists of items? Why not also on expanding the catch-all controls of the allies for exactly the same logic of the WMD applications in our rule within, and that doesn't require a change of law in their systems? Is that part of the discussion with allies as well, not just lists, but also end use controls?
Yeah, as much alignment as possible, right? But starting with the list is the easier part. What you described is the harder part, but it's not off, it shouldn't be off the table.
Okay.
Because if we're really talking alignment, you need both.
President Lee, does these things resonate in the office of the president and the discussions that you are a part of with the same level of sensitivity, you think?
Well,
The green button, sir,
Green.
on your,
frankly, I'm not officially in the position of answering that kind of question, because that lies that falls into the policies area. So our organization is just supporting and augmenting the government functions in that regard. Well, I'm sorry about that.
but perhaps there is a value to this discussion informing the kind of research that you are able to sponsor and
Yes,
type of support that you can provide decision
yes,
makers.
that's exactly why I'm here.
Right.
Why I'm here with all the researchers and the professors from Korea to exchange our ideas and then convey the result of the discussion to the Korean policymakers.
Thank you. And we have a rich delegation of senior industry from South Korea also here, both in the room, but also as part of the delegation. So I think that will help inform them as well on the policy side of this and the FTPR and many other things that we are discussing. Any other last quick question for our panelists? We started a bit late, so that's why I'm allowing a few extra minutes. Oh, Mike, yes, please. Dr. Beck, yes.
Thank you. A quick question for Matt. I've been involved like you in this area for decades now, and have seen shift from Cold War controls to rogue states to non-state actors. And one of my concerns is that the shift to competition with China will kind of degrade our ability to use export controls as a tool of non-proliferation. Do you in any way share those concerns?
I wouldn't, it's a valid question. I would say a good question, Mike, but certainly there's been no diminution. We're not decontrolling anything. And frankly, the news about Russia using Iranian drones frankly highlights something that, notwithstanding our trade embargo, because other supplier governments did not have similarly restrictive policies, this is now where we are. So to some extent, this actually might work in reverse. Now, again, drones are not, they're conventional arms, not WMD, but you can easily see WMD being put on drone, right? So I think you actually might have, interestingly enough, almost the opposite result because of that, right? And also there are reports that the Russians are trying to buy conventional arms from North Korea. It's a very strange phenomenon. Again, not non-proliferation, but obviously North Korea was is one of the primary non-proliferation targets. So I don't think that would be the case. It's a good question.
Okay, I don't want to try and even sum up a rich discussion like this. What I can say is that this provides us, as I was saying and hoping, the framework within which to continue our work and discussion. So we'll have a quick round of coffee. Mr. Andrew Lawrence from the XBIS office is here to lead that discussion. Mr. Wolf will join the panel after this, along with Mr. Fleming and some others, very notable speakers. So let me just say that the conference proceedings are available to you as the starting point. What I hope we will do is capture some of these highlights between today and tomorrow and put together a little AAR type of an after action and a compendium, which will be available. And Stimson and Kosti would be delighted to get more of your questions in by insights, advice, to capture all of that, and hopefully it'll result into a meaningful follow-on type of activities, meetings, and research. So please join me in thanking our guests for this very rich discussion. We have some non-intellectual stimulation by way of coffee outside. And then let's honor the light traffic and get back here in about 15 minutes so we can get started with the